All right, welcome everybody to tonight's discussion of Federico Fellini's La Strada. I'm gonna begin with some shameless self promotion, and I'm gonna go ahead and screen share uh, my own video on La Strada, just in case you missed it. My name is Christopher Flakus, and this is La Strada in 7 minutes. Peter Bonadello. First, there was Zavantini, who is the film theorist and screenwriter of neorealism behind screenwriter for Umberto De, screenwriter for The Bicycle Thieves, and the great film theorist behind neorealism. First, we start with love, as all things with Fellini should begin, focus on, and end. A love between Giulietta Massina, who became a celebrity with this film, but was already the wife of Federico Fellini. She married him and loved him. For 40 years they were married. So along with this vaudeville variety show Carnival, we go on, and Zampano dresses her up. He follows his disgusting impulses and rapes her, even though the rape, which for him is just does it like it's nothing. She sees a tenderness in it. It is heartbreaking that she sees him with affection. She got raped by this guy, and she looks at him with affection because she thinks that it was a sign of love, something somehow. And Zambrano, he sees women as subordinates. He sees them as unbeneath. He sees them as totally beneath him, which is hilarious because he's like a nothing. But he just sees them as something used for either passing joy or something to be exploited. Like Gelsomina is just there basically to put food in his mouth. She's the one who does all the heavy lifting, and you know. Joy shines out of her. She's like the female Charlie Chaplin, is what people said of her in this film. And it really it combines the commedia dell'arte, with the Happy Hooligan cartoon with that was a big inspiration for this. Google that. The sketches from the Book of Dreams directly reflect Fellini's lifelong interest in this film. Let's put it that way. It's a sparse screenplay, really. It's beautifully uncomplex.
400 posti a sedere, poi in piedi. Me conosci? Andiamo.
Guarda chi c'è, ciufile! Avete fatto benissimo.
So Gelsomina joins this vaudeville show with Zampano, this brute is shown with a 360 camera that is juxtaposed completely with this natural clown that is Gelsomina. The artistry of her, I mean, she studied with real clowns to get this role exactly right, and you can see it. Apart from that, her face, I mean, she was just born for it. You can tell that she's also neurodivergent very early on, likely somewhere on the spectrum, and that's important. It's important to note because she has a childlike innocence and a connection with children, and yet she's far less stunted than Zambano, who has no excuse for his ignorance. His ignorance is willful. She's brilliant in many ways, emotionally a genius, and it doesn't matter that she's intellectually challenged. That's actually another reason that Fellini finds these characters to be worthy of our attention and sacred for being outsiders, misfits, clowns, and alchemists. Gelsomina basically finds in the fool a parallel, and he could treat her with compassion, but instead of doing so, he treats her with similar brutishness. All he doesn't rape or hit her the way that Zampano does, but he mocks her. And at the same time, he says that she is a natural clown, and he acknowledges that, and that's important to her. I don't want to ruin this film for those of you who haven't seen it, so I will say that the tragedy to come, and that the bliss, the agonizing grace that's delivered to Zampano at the end is bestial character, and it does come at the cost of something enormous, and he sees too late that he had the most beautiful person right there that he could have ever wanted, and he was the richest man in the world, and he was chasing all the wrong, stupid, worthless things when he had the one worthwhile thing he'd ever had in his life. A monster like him was offered a chance at something beautiful. It's, in the end, I guess, for him, such an indecent creature, just to have known her and been loved by her, that makes him lucky and something sanctified, even if he doesn't deserve it, I think. There's a lot that's saint-like about Gelsomina. And that is La Strada in 7 minutes. Thank y'all.
Hey, guys.
All right, is the screen share over?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Derek, welcome.
Hey.
Y'all, this is Derek. Derek is a painter, a poet.
Hey, David. Hey, Greg.
You know each other. Then Brixton is two. You have above Jade and Derek, two of my Marxist friends.
Oh, yeah, I met Jade. Yeah, hey.
You guys are probably going to give me a little bit of a Marxist analysis tonight. And I think having watched this film, I kind of want to think of it in that sense, like what different ways are there of looking at it. Brixton and I are suddenly prepared. We're going to talk about Salo, and we're going to talk about Italy's fascist past. But first, Jade, do you have any thoughts? And this just to open it up, and I want to hear from the ladies. Mom, unmute your mic, and Alex, tell us what you felt about this film, which is a woman's film. And you have the Happy Hooligan cartoon that I referenced. That is perfect.
One of the great things about this cartoon, which is from the like 1900, 1903, 1905, is that at the end of every strip, I'm trying to find a page here. At the end of every strip, the main character, Happy Hooligan, gets beat up by the police. I don't know if you can see here the police officer. So every time he gets beaten up and carried away by the police, and all because he's just trying to help somebody. Like every time he's just trying to help somebody, but everything goes wrong, and the police come and they immediately blame it on him because he looks like a bum. That is so on the nose, and that's something Fellini would have loved because he definitely had that love for the marginalized. Derek, sorry.
Yeah. So immediately what I want to get off is Europe has a very, very rich history of clowns, and there's also Pierrot in France, the sad clown. That's Absolutely. What I immediately thought of when I watched the film, and I was like, this was a devastating film for me. Like, I remember watching it, I was just like so sad because it was like, you know, all he like she wanted to love him, but he couldn't love, you know, and it's like it's just that constant, like, you know, and the dynamic is also kind of almost repeated in like movies like Blue Velvet and like, you know, with Dennis Hopper, and he's just unable to love this woman, but he wants to like so badly, but he just ends up just fucking abusing her. Yeah. and but yeah, I also think of I've never seen that cartoon. That's awesome. But I always think of Pierrot when I because actually I think before the film I'd seen Pierrot Le Fou by Godard. And
with
yeah,
from Breathless come
Belmondo.
Belmondo. Yeah, that's
and yeah, it's just has always the concept of the sad clown has always kind of broken my heart, I think.
One thing I like about it is that it's not self-commenting. It's just a straightforward. He just tells the story straightforward. There's no editorializing. He just lets the story speak for itself. Lets the images speak for itself, and so it's timeless. I mean, it's as fresh emotionally and fresh as the moment it came out.
I know what's going to happen. I know the ending, and I convulse with tears every time because she's so adorable. And I'm gonna break your hearts again really quick before passing it on to Jade for me and the ladies. First of all, because I really want to hear what you have to say, because this is such a woman's film, and in that has to do with what I have to say next. Is I'm going to show you one more video, but first I'll explain what's so sad about it. In this video, which I will just call Don't Cry, Fellini's getting his final Oscar nomination, his final Oscar. I think he still has more Oscars than any other director. And his first one was for La Strada. But he did not know that at the time, Julieta Messina was receiving treatment for cancer and keeping it from him because he had a weak heart, and she was afraid that his heart couldn't handle it. And at one point he found out because they ended up roommates at the hospital, quite literally. And he died 4 months before her, and she died holding a picture of him buried on top of him. And I want to say that it's Gelsomina, not her name. It's the name of the character, Gelsomina, engraved on her epitaph engraved says, "Now, Gelsomina, you can cry," which is heartbreaking, you know. And so this role is the life-defining role. And what would you have to say about that?
So the last time I saw this movie, it must have been 10 or 11. I saw it with my grandmother, but I think one of the takeaways from that viewing was the importance of laughter in a brutish world. I think that's a particularly prescient message for today, that no matter the kind of treatment that Gelsomina received, and you can make that as problematic as you want to make it. Yeah, it's, you know, this is very much a woman who's victimized, and it's sad that every response of brutality is met with love. But I think there's something to how we articulate resistance if it comes from that profound place of love, like Gelsomina, because she does manage to liberate Zampano in the end, and in some ways through madness liberate herself.
Mom, is there anything you'd like to add as
that made me think of another Italian movie, Life is Beautiful, where he's always trying to make his son laugh.
Very. Oh, you're right. Wow, that's an interesting.
I hate that movie.
Double feat. Really?
Yeah, I hate it.
It's been a long time since I've seen it. I love Roberto Benigni, but
that movie made me cry a lot.
That's I have the same problem as the boy with the striped pajamas. Is that it's like the most saccharine view of the Holocaust. It's the Holocaust. You don't need to make it more. You don't need to tug on the heartstrings anymore. It's
Yeah,
already
right.
pretty much there for you. But they have to have the son of the in the boy with the striped pajamas. They have to have the son become friends with the boy at the edge of the wall, which would never happen. They would be like, "You filthy Jew." But yeah, it's just but that movie for people who I literally showed. I watched Schindler's List and they hated it. But the boy with the striped pajamas made them cry, and these were people who thought that there were Jewish laser conspiracies and stuff. So for them, the boy with the striped pajamas made them accept that the Holocaust was real. So if that movie on that level does achieve that, then hell, maybe that's something, you know. So I'm going to share this really quick now. It's the final. It's really the love between these two people. That is Giulietta Massina and Fellini. And oh no, this is Akira Kurosawa. Wrong. Here we go. All right. Can you guys see it?
No. Not yet.
Loren's hair.
Yes?
Nope.
And Sophia Loren's hair. That's a shame.
I'm sorry.
There we go.
There we go. There we go.
Thank you very much. Grazie Marcellino, sei venuto. I would like to have the voice of Domingo to say it's a long, long thanks. What I can say? Well, I really did not expect it. Or perhaps I did, but not before another 25 years. Anyway, it's better now. I come from a country and I belong to a generation for which America and movies were almost the same thing. And now, to be here with you, my dear Americans, make me feel at home. I want to thank all of you to making me feel in this way. In these circumstances, it's easy to be generous and to thank everybody. I would like, naturally, first of all, to thank all the people that have worked with me. I cannot nominate everyone. Let me make only one name of an actress who is also my wife. Thank you, dear Giulietta, and please stop crying.
She knew at the time that this was heartbreaking. You can see that she's struggling with it.
I'm sorry, but I've got to throw a log on the fire. I'll be right back.
Okay, wow, boy, there's
It's cold here, man.
It is.
That's literal. I'm the one who took it euphemistically, and I'm a disgusting animal. So that's
But
my
we
bad.
love you nonetheless.
So there's that really sad in the context of the moment, knowing that they had so little left to live. I still feel like if you watch his films, there's not a lot known. They were very private people, but I think that through their films, they told the story of their relationship. He wrote Strada.
I get a feeling she had to put up with a lot from him.
Oh, probably.
In terms, maybe not as brutal as Zampa, whatever his name is. But I think, wasn't he pretty much a womanizer too?
I mean, he was looking 8.5, or what is it? Yeah.
8.5, and Julieta the Spirits.
And in the long run, I think she, in the film, in La Strada, she was stronger than he was.
Oh, absolutely. And zampano is the word means is close to zampani, which means an animal paw. So even his name is
Oh
bestial.
wow. Okay.
But yeah, she is definitely much more empathetic and human. And the real Giulietta Messina, I think we can assume that Fellini made her put up with a lot. But Giulietta the Spirits, which we'll get to later, is after 8.5. It's when he decides to put his wife in the center stage again, and
Another great
it,
film.
God, we only have 10 minutes left. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna have to read Brixton's stuff next. Jade, I'm gonna let you talk. I don't have I paid for it, but it's not giving me the full version.
Oh,
So
man. Well,
so Jade, go ahead and take give us the Marxist
man, I had a whole
analogy.
essay I was gonna read, but I think I'm gonna summarize it down to one. I'm not even gonna read that. I'm just gonna talk about La Strada. How I was talking to Chris about this yesterday, and we were talking about why so many of the neorealists didn't had a bad reaction to La Strada. And I said that I thought the reason why was probably because Zampano, he's kind of an Uncle Tom, and he's kind of a sellout. He's this proletarian with neoliberal bourgeois aspirations. And I said that this is expressed in the film. This in a way. Messina, what's her name?
Giulietta
Josefina is trying to
Messina.
overcome this form of alienation that Zampano embodies, and basically what it comes down to is that Zampano does love her, but he can only express it in this bourgeois form of having her, of possessing her. He can only express it through jealousy and brute acquisition, right? And I said that this comes from Gramsci probably, and especially from Gramsci through the economic and philosophic manuscripts of 1844, of the early works of Marx that really didn't appear until 1932, when they were published, and finally like Gramsci could read it, and thus it enters into Western Marxism. And so, but the passage that reminds me of that I'd like to read from the 1844 manuscripts says this: so the positive supersession of private property, i.e. the sensuous appropriation of the human essence and human life, of objective man and of human works by and for man, should not be understood only in the sense of direct one-sided consumption. Man appropriates his integral essence in an integral way as a total man, all his human relations to the world, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling, thinking, contemplating, sensing, wanting, acting, loving. In short, all the organs of his individuality, like the organs which are directly communal in form, are in their objective approach, or in their approach to the object, the appropriation of that object. Private property has made us so stupid and one-sided that an object is only ours when we have it, when it exists for us as capital, or when we directly possess, eat, drink, wear, inhabit, etc. In short, when we use it.
Yeah, but I want to.
There's one last bit here. Just a moment.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
sorry.
Yeah. Oh no.
Therefore, all the physical and intellectual senses have been replaced by the simple estrangement of all these senses, the sense of having. The supersession of private property is therefore the complete emancipation of all human senses and attributes. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's a great quote, man. Yeah, but in that way, I sympathize with those people, because it takes me back to, even you look at Emile Zola, La Bête Humaine, the human beast. It's like,
Great film by Renoir.
Yeah, he made it into a film, and I was recently reading Proudhon, and he was talking in the and the oh my god, I'm spacing so bad.
Yeah, he was big on private property
And the philosophy
against
and the philosophy of poverty. He talks about how, you know, we are conditioned to be just this one person working on this one task in a long line, and it basically makes us into a beast. It turns us back into the bestial like property of what we were before. You know, like we're just a nothing.
Like, and it's interesting that Zampano he's wearing military duds from both sides, and it's been years since the war, so that shows a certain level of poverty. But as soon as he gets some scratch, he goes and buys nice clothes instead of any of the. And it reminds me of, like, you know, you go to the ghetto, and the worst in the ghetto, you'll see some houses that are falling apart, but they'll have a Lambo parked in the front yard. You know, so it's like these priorities where there's these aspirations, as Jade said, towards neoliberalism and towards bourgeois middle class pomp and circumstance. But I want to go back to this idea of owning love, of the ownership of love, this Western concept of love, which David and I have talked about before, and I want to get a spiritual answer from him as a Buddhist and as just a spiritual teacher. What would you say Zampano's greatest failure was as a lover?
Bullying.
Yeah.
You know, this whole well, I mean, not that I think of it in these terms all the time or anything, but I mean, pretty much pure ego. You know, everything is, you know, she's part of his self-validation and her compliance with, you know, her just servitude to him is his way of proving his existence, I guess. I don't know, something like that. But mainly it's, I guess it's like maybe the film shows the failure of cruelty. The failure of cruelty, because, like, you know, she always, and the whole idea that there's a part of I guess that spiritual part of that is untouched. There's a part that is always untouched, no matter what. It always retains its innocence and its transcendence, and she always does. I mean, it's always there that she gets sad, she goes through all kinds of things, but she in a way, I mean, she breaks him. Eventually she breaks him.
Yes.
And you know, which is what happens to ego. You know,
it's got to die. It ain't comfortable.
But I mean, that's just off the top of my head. I haven't really thought about it much in that way.
I think that was beautiful. That's a beautiful way to put it. Yeah, that final scene with him, I think it's grace, and I think of those Bernini sculptures, you know, that everyone always thought were so sensual and orgasmic, and sure, there's that interpretation. I think is very true, but it's also the pain of grace. You know, it's like they're being spiked and impaled by grace, which, you know, is also very sexual, but it's like being, you know, just overwhelmed with you know, the experience of grace, and that's what happens with Zampano. Grace it sounds lovely, and it's sold by televangelists these days as one thing, but I believe that Fellini believed, and Pasolini as well, what they had in common. And I'm so sorry, Brixton, that we didn't have a chance to get to your essay. We're going to do a separate episode for that on Pasolini. But Pasolini and Fellini shared an interest in grace.
I'd like to hear that.
They had different approaches to grace, and that Sallow episode, it's got to be an episode in itself. There's just two. Yeah,
I love Sallow.
It's such an important movie.
And I had also read 120 Days. So
I read 120 Days while I was in a mental hospital.
Oh my goodness!
Wow. That's so we have a hell of an episode.
I read it when it gave me an epiphany because I read it in the late 70s in San Francisco, and I was I was experimenting in every kind of sexuality, and I was definitely delving into S&M and on both sides of that polarity. And I remember I can even picture right where I was in this cafe when it just dawned on me that the logical outcome of everything that he was writing was death. It was all aimed towards death. And yet what I was experiencing was this other part of it, which is not so much indecide, which is catharsis. That through these like extreme experiences, like I said, on both sides of that polarity. One more thing, and then I'm going to really pretty much shut up, is the tape for me, one of the longest lasting takeaways of reading Desaad was just exposing all those archetypes of all the corrupt judges, the corrupt, people in power, and how they misuse their power, and how there's this sexual element to it, and
totally.
And I don't know how many times through the decades when there have been certain people in the news and people in power that were doing certain things, and it was just like,
makes you think
there's a whole Sadian thing going on there.
Well, like I was just talking about it today because I follow this page. It's called Right Wing Watch, and it's like following all the politicians, and just a absurd amount of Republican like mayors and governors recently have been getting arrested for pedophilia. And they were the ones that were like touting that film, like, Songs of Freedom, Song of Freedom or Sound of Freedom or whatever.
What's that company called? Angel Productions. Angel Productions. They make a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah.
And then like one of the producers of that film got caught for statutory rape or something like.
Wow, that's beautiful.
It's just like it's an old axiom for me, or old like saying like you just if somebody is really against something, they're probably the worst doing it. Like if somebody is rallying against, like, if there's a politician that has made his name against homosexuality, he's going out and getting those call boys.
Jay, I want to hear your essay.
And I'm going to move into speaker view so that it goes to you, Jade, whenever you're talking.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I want to thank you, Chris, for asking me to read here. Last week, Chris told me we were going to do this talk on neo-realist cinema and in particular Gramsci's influence. And I mentioned Theodore Adorno, and he said that that was another influence on neo-realism.
Gramsci,
so I threw this essay together. I'll try to read it quickly because obviously time is of the essence. So if you have any questions, please wait until the end. It is a common point of contention among Marxists today whether cultural critique is a distraction from class conflict. Antonio Gramsci is to a great extent the one we have to thank for the sociological framework of cultural materialism, although it does have its predecessors, namely Thorstein Veblen's theory of the leisure class. Veblen critiqued bourgeois culture as material categories of bourgeois values, the ruling ideology. He claimed that making a show of excessive waste, which he called conspicuous consumption, was the central interest of the leisure class and the core of bourgeois culture. Gramsci carried on the work of cultural materialism, which we now know, of cultural criticism, which we now know as cultural materialism, as opposed to historical materialism, the dialectic of class conflict. Cultural materialism is what, in my opinion, so-called philosophers of the right wing, such as Jordan Peterson, have mistakenly called cultural Marxism. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be a Marxist to do critical sociology. Gramsci is remarkable in this instance due to a historical fact in the continued development of Marxism after the realization of communist societies in the Eastern Bloc. That is the fact that the neglected early works of Marx and Engels were finally published in 1932 while Gramsci was in prison. His prison notebooks are thus filled with the concepts of Marx's early dialectic of civil and political society, an early form of critique on the bourgeois category of the public sphere found in Marx's early essay on the Jewish question. Although the 1844 manuscripts in the critique of the German ideology were not published in Italian translation until later in the 50s and 60s, Gramsci was already so devoted to that he mastered German and even Russian and occupied himself with translating these works for his own study in prison throughout the 1930s. Thus, Gramsci occupies a special place in history as one of the first Marxists to come closely to understanding Marxist philosophy. More closely to understanding it, I mean. Soon after the Eastern Bloc's complete failure to escape the tyranny of a ruling class. Another who occupies this special place in history is the Hungarian Marxist phenomenologist György Lukács, whose history and class consciousness is guided by the surfaced revelation of Marx's early works in that period. We should perhaps look more closely at Lukács if we had time, since his theory of literary realism is well known and bears comparison to new realism in French and Italian cinema. But to return to Gramsci, perhaps the concept most well known for introducing is the theory of cultural hegemony, or hegemony, however you like to say that. The absolute unquestionable dominance of one culture in society, while other cultures are unthinkable, is what cultural hegemony refers to. Having cultural hegemony does not arise by cultural dominance alone, but by the power over the media to produce the appearance of a dominant culture through artificial prevalence and ubiquity. With the control of the media, you can spread your message more rapidly and post it everywhere as though it were ubiquitous, right? The ownership of production afforded this image of a dominant culture having the funds either to own or invest in media production, and could therefore prescribe whatever culture it wanted, whatever product it wanted to sell. It became an industry of its own, what Adorno called the culture industry, which constantly invents new object relations to replace the social relations which political economy and commodification have alienated. Next to Gramsci, Theodore Adorno, another influence on Fellini and Pasolini, was perhaps the preeminent Marxian aesthetician. Adorno employed an exceptional metaphor that applied to the material contradiction of the exchange principle, which is commodification, as equally as it applied to the material contradiction in the bourgeois hegemony of the public sphere. And that is that what appears to be a proportionality is merely the prevalence of a uniform disproportion. Gramsci's work on the public sphere of civil society perhaps culminates in the work of Jürgen Habermas's structural transformation of the public sphere. Gramsci essentially indicated that the disparate classes could infiltrate and reclaim the public sphere from the ruling class. He said that it depended on intellectuals to show moral leadership, thus guiding the disparate industrial and economic classes into civil accord without having to dominate the public sphere. It could be small acts of intellectual expression like a novel or a film, which remind people of their common humanity. Now I want to talk about class consciousness and the division of labor, and this how contradiction in civil society arises from this. I might have to skip ahead a little bit. The actor, this is a quote from Nietzsche. I was rereading Nietzsche, and I was like, wow, this fits perfectly. Nietzsche says, the actor, the mime, the dancer, the musician, the lyric poet are fundamentally related in their instincts and are intrinsically one, but they have gradually been specialized and separated from each other, even to the point of contradicting each other. The lyric poet remained united the longest to the musician, the actor, the dancer. He says that in The Twilight of the Idols. Nietzsche describes a contradiction that arises from the division of labor, very similar to Marx's distinction of class consciousness. Remember, as Marx says, consciousness is determined by life and not life by consciousness. And such that the material relations of one's economic and industrial class structure, one's consciousness is structured by one's economic and industrial class. Hence, also the division of labor and the contradiction in civil society that produces a contradiction in consciousness, i.e. class consciousness. All this is to be found in the German Ideology by Karl Marx. This contradiction of class differentiation is at work in cinema more than any other art form today, perhaps with the exception of architecture. And I was going to talk a little bit more about architecture, but I think I can skip that because it's not really, it was just an example. It can be said that whereas modern architecture presents a material manifestation of bourgeois values in a building or in a city, cinema presents a spectacular manifestation of these values, an ideology which seems to have the immateriality of a dream or an immutable eternal idea, and yet, nevertheless, requires the same material forces of production in which we find the inception of our alienation. We must point out that neorealism countered the bureaucratic process of cinema and the division of labor, which turns the artistic process into a machine, an assembly line, a bureaucratic category of social production. It did so. Neorealism did this by working under remarkably informal conditions, with unprofessional actors and crew, and in the independence from the oversight of a production studio and the socio-political interests of investors. The fact that neorealists employed unprofessionals suggests an organically defined non-adherence to the strict divisions of labor in production. That the film's production structure of organization could be organically fluid was aided by the film crew's ignorance of industry formality. All of this reflects Gramsci's philosophy of praxis, in which the problems of ideological obfuscation and practical contradiction are circumvented by direct collaboration and collective action. And in this way, the theoretical dimension is inseparable from the practical dimension and avoids the contradiction of such a separation. Should I continue?
We're getting pretty close. I mean, it's excellent, and it's totally
That's a brilliant
on point.
essay, man.
I can skip to the end.
If it just only because I don't want this thing to die on us again, but I think it's keeping in mind that these were Italian Marxist partisans, especially for Pasolini, heroes. Adorno and Gramsci were major influences. But Fellini he comes out of neorealism himself. He was the screenwriter in Rome Open City, which is probably the film that most was shot under the conditions you'd say. They were shooting in the rubble, you know?
And sort of the legacy of what you were talking about in terms of how they made the films, and they just went outside of a system. Reminds me of what Cassavetes did when they made Woman Under the Influence.
Oh, what a movie! And Shadows too, where it's you can't tell who's an actor and who isn't.
That legacy lives on, has lived on through a lot of indie production. Well, not even indie, but just outsider approaches.
I think I can wrap this up pretty quickly.
Sure, please.
These are things to consider when viewing neorealist cinema. Think about how the auteurs included within the spectacle a conflictual tension with the very contradiction of bourgeois civil society, as a contradiction creeping into our spiritual lives due to our complicity with a contradiction in our civil lives. Think about how the hero of the story struggles to overcome the alienation implicit in their social situation. Thus, we see in Pasolini and Fellini characters who have been marginalized in society, whose sacred place in society, as it would be portrayed in bourgeois media, is revealed in new realist cinema for what it is, trapped and confounded by social alienation. Neorealism stands social status on its head, Class is not the traditional Roman persona where everyone has a special role and a place in society, which the dramaturgy of mainstream cinema swiftly lends it. Class serves only to obscure the fact that all have been deprived of a place in society, precisely as the real living people that they are in their humanity. And this is perhaps the best explanation of the meaning of realism in neorealism and the reality that their films attempt to restore to cinema. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, man.
Very good.
Hey, thank you. That deserves a round of applause.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, with both of them, though, didn't they go sort of eventually beyond neorealism in terms of, you know,
absolutely.
the fantasy and magic reality and all of that
The Strada, it was in fact a movie that pissed off a lot of neorealists because in neorealism, characters were emblematic. These were characters that were psychologically real, that were psychologically characters and personalities. They didn't. Gelsomina doesn't stand in for all beleaguered clowns. She is just a beleaguered clown in this particular situation.
Because I was also thinking of how your description of at the end, your recap at the end, it reminded me, like in Satyricon, in Copio and his buddy, I forget the other guy's name, they were also, even though it's not a neo-realistic film specifically, they are outside of society and, you know, breaking all kinds of class rules as they go along.
I've got that in the mail.
Inspiring the viewer to do the same. It's inspired me to do the same.
Yeah. If you read the Satyricon, it's brilliant in that they go around and they're kind of like Robin Hood and their merry men. They just exploit the weaknesses of the wealthy, and they get in and you know, they have one of their like slave boys that like it's a really ridiculous story. It's a tragedy that we only have it in fragments, but
he films it like a science fiction movie, and the fragmented nature lends itself to Fellini. Before we finish up, I just wanted to throw this one quote in that might clear things up a little bit. So speaking of caricature and the happy hooligan, and also Fellini, who began as a cartoonist, and this is from the great companion to Federico Fellini, edited by Frank Burke, Marguerite Waller, and Margherita Gubbara. Caricature also forcefully highlights the supranatural vein that we must have seen evoked by both Bazan and Rondi, as well as Fellini himself. The supranatural must be understood in its most literal sense as what stands above the natural and the human, becoming a way to embrace at the means the denaturalization of reality and at the same time the identification of its processes and essential forms. The boundaries between the caricatural and the visionary remain constantly open. This is something that Italo Calvino would also do. In Fellini's films, what Chris defines as the magic of image is linked to an archaic and almost witch-like belief in its power, something that coexists with the processes of deconstruction and unmasking. All of Fellini comes down to masks and truth. You know,
masks that reveal the truth.
Masks that reveal the truth. There are masks that reveal the truth when they're confronted one with the other. So, for example, when Gelsomina, played by Giulietta in La Strada, the first caricature we get is of the clown, the kind of sweet Charlie Chaplin clown. The image of Gelsomina in La Strada, its exemplary manifestation of a scribbled being who, beyond a clear reference to Frederick Burr's comic book Happy Hooligan, and who, beyond that, Charlie Chaplin is a main influence, is emphasized by Fellini himself and his knowledge of his wife, I believe, and evokes a creature with quality, starting with her name, and under a childlike view of the world that he imbues her with. And these characteristics don't need to be fleshed out because they're enough and conveyed well enough through her adorable expressions that we see that she's a natural clown, and we see that she's just a natural, and it's almost ending in 10 minutes, that we see that she's a natural clown. So
that's what I meant by the film does not comment on itself.
Exactly. It states it as it is, which I think also pisses off the neo-realists, because for something like The Bicycle Thieves, stating it as it is leaves you with a moral conclusion. You're supposed to identify with injustice, and here you have injustice, but you're left with some strange grace for a character that doesn't deserve it, who is himself both a product of class consciousness and class difficulties. So it is much more complex psychologically and socioeconomically.
It poses the question of is there redemption for us, you know?
Yes.
And that we've been conditioned to be these destructive forces, you know, out of just this brutal system. Can we be redeemed and find our own?
Interesting that in La Dolce Vita, which we'll talk about in a couple weeks, that character of Marcello, who shares the same name as the actor Marcello Mastroianni, he is denied grace that Zampano is given. If you remember the end of the movie, if not, you wait till we see it, and you will see what I mean.
I mean, at the end, you don't. I mean, I didn't really see grace at the end of the film. I mean, there's no indication of actually what he does after his breakdown.
He probably goes right back to being Zampano, but in that moment, at least, she broke him, like you said.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that to be broken that
He's
way,
never going to be the same.
Her
she breaks him with love.
Her spirit haunts him through that song.
Exactly. Gelsomino's theme by Nino Rota is a leitmotif throughout the film that is of the utmost importance. But Alex and Mom, I want, like, again, for a film that is so central around women, we've heard so little from the women.
I mean, I just kind of reiterate my point. I think love is a tremendous force that drives this movie, and that shows us a path towards resistance. She embraces everything with love, even when it's dealing her a blow to the face. So there's a lesson in Gelsomina. And there's a lesson in how we can carry our lives. I don't like comparing it to freaking Life is Beautiful. I guess there's merit to that film, but I also came away from watching that film a little bit like, did we need it?
I think that the Nazis probably would have found that kid.
Yeah, honestly.
It just, that was hard for me to get over.
Can you hear me?
I don't think grace is ever what we expect it to be. Sometimes it can be violent. It can be heartbreaking. Grace is liberation, and unfortunately, liberation isn't always going to be the happy ending for us. But it will set us free.
It might be death,
It's inescapable.
Yeah, absolutely. Dad, you had a final wrap up?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. Well, a couple of things I want to mention. One is that in the end, I think it's just before that, he's doing a performance. And I think that said a lot in itself, because you could see he didn't have it in him. He just was kind of perfunctorily going through the steps, but he wasn't even interested in what he was doing, and the crowd wasn't that interested in him either. He just did his bit. Okay, I broke the chain, goodbye. And that was it. And I think that showed more than anything else, how devastated he was.
I love you, Dad. Thank you so much. I love you all. You're all some of my family and favorite people. So it was great to have you all here. Jade, thank you for sharing that essay with us.
That was brilliant.
Brilliant and important to add a political dimension, I think, to these films, even though Fellini himself was moving away from being categorized as a political director. and was always so much more than that.
Arguably, the last time I reread the German ideology, I concluded that it was Karl Marx's aim to abolish politics. Politics is a contradiction in itself. The way, if I could summarize what Karl Marx basically said, he said that politics is a solution to a contradiction in civil life. It's a, they duplicated the world into a political world and a civil world. And this, the political world is supposed to solve a contradiction in the civil society, but it's never going to do that because it creates a new class, it creates new industry and so forth, such that it will always fail at what it was supposed to do in order to preserve its existence.
Somebody from Magnolia that I met, basically a good guy, married with kids. I met him at a poetry reading 15 years ago. He answered in a back and forth. He said, "Democracy just doesn't work," and that was chilling to me.
I was just talking to a friend about that today. Yeah, he was just telling me about to listen to this one guy. He was talking about how democracy, we need to move us back to a monarchy, and I was like, "Are you insane?"
That is what a lot of people are proposing, that kind of stuff. But anyway,
they're not thinking of the alternative as anything that's better. I mean, it's not anything like what Jade was analyzing. It's more just dumbing it all down.
Yeah, and because people are we have to, unfortunately, I think that someone like Fellini, who has the spectacle and the carnivalesque that can get their attention of a wider audience than, say, Pasolini. Pasolini might be the one more critical of society directly and the one more radical, but Fellini reaches a wider group, and maybe through Joy even presents a more attractive product of emancipation. And it's up to the artist, I believe, right now to reimagine better futures and better systems that are more pluralistic and anti-hegemonic. All right. Well, good night, guys. And thank you all so much for being a part of this.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see y'all.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.